helped him to understand policy spaces and climate science in general. He represented Uganda in COP26 in Glasgow, is it Glasgow? As a youth delegate leading global climate negotiations. He also participated in the, he also participated in the UNFCCC event in 2021, advocating for loss and damage to be included on the climate agenda. And it is this historical decision that led to the 2027 decision in Egypt, which became a turning point for loss and damage in the climate agenda. In 2022, in COP27, he co-authored Make 2027, COP27, a turning point for food systems. He highlighted that 2% of climate finance reaches small farm holders. He contributed to the position paper under the Food and Land Use Coalition and ProVeg to integrate food systems into climate policy. In 2023, in COP28, he continued his policy work on adaptation with the focus of leading loss and damage funding and scaling up adaptation finance for African smallholder farmers. He also participated in the African research paper in relation to adaptation. He has had an opportunity to be a part of the UNFCCC subsidiary bodies, SB 62 and SB 64 in Bonn, where he engaged in technical negotiations and policy dialogues on adaptation and climate finance. Professionally, he has also facilitated in the capacity building and skill sharing for climate activist program since 2025, and also this very year in 2026, where he leads the thematic area of teaching the participants the science of global warming and climate change. He has had an opportunity to facilitate in a capacity building session on integrating sustainability into student work and channeling youth innovation towards climate action at the University of Milano. He has also spearheaded a campaign for legal recognition of commercial forest concessions and facilitated workshops on climate legislation for indigenous communities under environment and governance consultancy, group 50/50 in DRC, Congo. He has had an opportunity to lead an organization known as Agape Earth Coalition as the head research programmer and campaigns. He is also the ambassador for Food and Land Use Coalition since 2023. He has also had an opportunity to be an administrator for the Rise Up movement in channeling and supporting grassroots advocacy and strategic planning and grant management. So allow me, we're going to use our emojis. I'm sorry that the profile is that heavy. So allow me use our reaction to welcome Mr. Omnuk Joshua to our session. Mr. Omnuk.
Thank you very much. That was a very long introduction,
Oh, yeah.
but thank you. My name is Mr. Manuk Joshua. I'm glad to be your facilitator today, and I'm glad for that turn up that you've all made it on time. I'm really grateful. Also, in the meantime, you can share in the chat your name, where you're from, and the school that you're teaching. I'm going to be sharing my screen, and we'll start our presentation. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes,
Lillian,
I
are you
can
able to
see
see
the
my
screen.
All right, thank you very much. So today we shall be going through policy and advocacy and how it integrates in climate education. Ian, are you able to help me admit people?
I'll be doing so. Thank you.
All right. So basically, after this session, you'll be having an idea of what is policy, what is advocacy, and how can it be integrated in climate education. So you'll have an understanding of climate policy in simplicity. We'll not go through the whole climate policy, but at least you'll be having a map of how it flows from a global perspective to a local perspective. Also, you're able to understand the role a teacher can play, or as an individual, what role you can play. We also hope that from the practical sessions, we hope you'll get some advocacy skills and how to organize classroom actions. Would anyone like to share with us their name and where they're from? If you would like to speak and share your name and where you're from and the school you're teaching. We'll get like 5 people.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, my name is Emma Wako. A teacher of social studies at Maxon Bay Primary School, located in the group of prisons, Kampala District, Nakawa Division, Central part of Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other person? A lady preferably. All right, let's go to the next thing.
This is Namara Beatrice.
Yes, Beatrice.
Namara Beatrice from
Yeah.
Uyukwe. A lower primary teacher. Teaching at St. Peter's Church of Uganda, Matale. And I'm glad to attend today's session.
So, Teacher Beatrice, we're going to have a nice breaker. Please share with us one of the hardest teaching moments you've experienced the previous term. And speak up audibly.
One of the hardest, what?
Teaching moments
One of the
you have
hardest
experienced
moments
the
I've
previous
experienced is the moment when I entered the class with less preparations and I had no learning aids. It's like you enter a lesson when you're just gambling. And I was not teaching that subject, mathematics, but my co was absent. And I wanted to come in and help her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Sembatia, are you able to share with us one thing you learned last time from a student?
Just that I have a noisy background, kindly accept my apologies. I don't know whether you're able to hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Can someone?
The hardest teaching moment I had. The hardest teaching moment I had was when I was called to do an interview in teaching, the teaching practice interview. So this interview I was told to teach math. And I was asked very many questions in allusions to mathematics, and unfortunately, I didn't have answers. So that was my hardest time.
All right, thank you. Can we get one person to share the hardest student you've ever dealt with, and another person? What thing they learned from a student the previous time? Those are two people. Anyone, you can unmute. Ms. Kabugo, are you able to share with us the hardest student you dealt with last term? All right, let us continue with our session today. Thank you very much for your participation. So we are going to begin with climate policy. First, to understand what is climate policy. Just like you'd have a policy that runs the school, or whatever school you belong to, there are particular policies which run the school, and those policies are consistent with meeting the vision of that school. Whereas those policies are meeting the vision of that school, those policies also have to be consistent with the policies the district education office has set in place.
Oh, what's in there?
And after that, the policies you've set up in the school, while they are consistent with the policies the district education office has put in place, they also must be consistent with the policies the Ministry of Education and Sports has set in place. So it has both an aspect of a bottom-up and also a top-to-bottom, meaning whatever the Ministry of Education sets up must not be difficult for the school at the bottom to implement. And the same thing is that the school at the bottom, whatever they're implementing, must be consistent with what the ministry has set in place. So that is a brief map of a school, a policy which could be in a school. For instance, if you have a policy in this school that, I'm not a teacher, I'll just use an hypothetical example. For instance, the policy is a student must fulfill particular requirements before they sit for their national examinations. As a school, that policy should not, the policy you're implementing in your school should not be against what the district has put in place. And also the district's policy should not be against what the Ministry of Education has put in place. So with that background, I would like you to look at climate in the same perspective. Climate policies are set up globally, but they are implemented until the local level. So climate is not just a topic in science. It's now a major geopolitical issue that reshapes how nations and how everyone relates with other nations. A geopolitical issue means that the climate has become, let me give an example of peace, security, children's rights. All those are geopolitical issues. Now climate has become a very major geopolitical issue because where there is a climate crisis, many other geopolitical issues are affected. That's why it's important as teachers to learn about what climate is. As a Ugandan, most of these things of climate, you know them because you're born in times where there have been climate disasters, there have been floods before, there have been droughts before. However, learning about it and how it's used in debates, how it's used to determine the policies and the directions nations are taking, most times we are left behind because we are not participating in these processes. We are leaving them for a certain group of people who also usually never represent the needs that we have. So this topic of climate policy is going to help you to see how you can participate in this general informing the climate solution of the entire world. Because even if you're in your local place, you can participate in an international decision or topic. We are going to use another example just to help us get another perspective of a policy. We're imagining a house is on fire, and you're the captain or you're the in charge. You're the one heading the fire department. So the first step when you're called that this particular market is on fire, or this particular house is on fire, the first thing will be to assess the risk. What caused the fire? Was it caused by petroleum? If it's caused by petroleum, you set a goal on how to fight it, because a fire caused by petrol cannot be fought by a fire caused by, let me say, grass, because all of them have different properties. So if you relate it to the climate context, after you assess the risk, you set goals. And these goals could be, let us reduce emissions, let us plant more trees, depending on the area that you have assessed. So in the same example of fighting a fire, the next step after assessing the threat, if the threat is so big, for instance, the fire that you have been called to fight is so great, you call for backup, you call for other firefighting teams to come and help. In the context of climate, like for instance in Uganda, sometimes when we have climate disasters, like in the eastern part of the country, sometimes we call on to other nations to support financially for us to help mitigate the effects of this disaster. Then the next thing could be deploying the firefighting tools. Like after you have found out that this is the kind of fire, I know in most of your schools you have fire extinguishers. And some extinguishers are of powder, some are of carbon dioxide only, and some are for only water. So as a firefighter, depending on the fire you found, you decide which kind of extinguisher you're going to use, which kind of approach are you going to use. And then with climate, those different tools and methods used to fight the fire in climate, they are like climate policies. For instance, if you look at cars, in these years that we are in, all cars have a certain limit of emissions they must emit. Meaning, if you decide to import a car which is older than a certain period of time, it releases more emissions, so the government will not allow you to import that car. That is a form of a policy. And the aim of this policy is to reduce the emissions. Are we together up to this point? You can put some emojis. All right. In the meantime, be noting down questions. In different intervals, we shall be pausing to answer some questions. All right, let's continue. So, an example of a house on fire, we are going to use it concurrently while comparing it with a climate policy or a government or the whole globe. So if you've set up policies, let me start with the example of fighting a fire. You've found out that this kind of fire that we have found, we don't need a water fire extinguisher, but we need a powder fire extinguisher. That means now that's the policy you're going to set in place to give your teams that this kind of fire only use a powder fire extinguisher. However, you find yourself in scenarios that your firefighters are not motivated to use that kind of extinguisher, maybe because it's heavy. So there are some things which you can do to motivate them to use that particular extinguisher. You can use a carrot, a stick, or the rule book. A carrot means incentives, a stick means penalties, and a rule book means regulations. How many teachers in this place are from the eastern part of the country? You can just share some emojis for me to get All right. Now, for the people from the eastern part of the country, you know, most times when you're preparing your gardens or before you plant, they put a yoke on oxen and they use it to plow. Or they even put a yoke on oxen and they use it to transport water or to transport supplies. In the western part of the country, they rarely do that to their animals, but in the east, they do that. So sometimes when the ox is not plowing well or it's not moving well, you can maybe put some kind of feeds in front of it to motivate it to move. That's what they call a carrot. Like you put a carrot in front of the animal. As it's trying to capture the carrot, it pulls the plow. Then a stick. So if that doesn't work, you use a stick. You beat the animal behind, and the animal will move. And the other rule book, there's no exact example for animals. But this is just for you to know what a carrot means, what a stick means. So in the climate policy, for example, if the government decides that from today, Faith, your hand is up. You have a question or you? All right, let's continue. So in the context of climate policy, when a general policy is set of cutting down CO2 emissions, it's shared to all nations that are subscribing to the United Nations. Because, you know, not every nation in the world subscribe to the United Nations, but many of them subscribe to the United Nations. So when the United Nations shares the goals of how we shall address this climate crisis, it shares them to nations. But it does not force the nations to do them, because the nations have a free will to either do or not to do. And that's where the incentives come in. For instance, they will say, if you plant more trees, there will be this reduction on your taxation. If you do this, we'll give you more loans easily. Those are incentives which are given to governments to encourage them to follow a particular policy. Then penalties. Sometimes whenever a country fails to comply to particular regulations that the UN has shared with them, they get difficulties in accessing particular funds, or they even get a penalty on their taxation system, meaning they're added a particular tariff through the International Monetary Fund. So the rule book is basically regulations which are set in the constitution of a particular nation. For instance, in the constitution of Uganda, cars beyond a certain year, it's illegal to import them. If you import it, the URA cannot clear that car, and you will have made your own laws. And some which are allowed in, they are taxed very, very highly. So that is something which is put in the rule book. All of this, I would like you to just get a background of policies. So in the same case, still we are comparing a fire scenario and the climate. A time comes when the firefighters are fighting this fire and they call on neighbors to help. For instance, in many developing countries, whenever they face a climate crisis, they don't have enough funds to build back the damaged roads, to resettle people. So that's when they advocate for an adaptation finance or adaptation fund, which can help countries with less funds to rebuild after a crisis. So the next thing we'd like to talk about is a climate policy dilemma. But before you go to a climate policy dilemma, I'd like to open up for 3 questions. Three questions. All right, no question at the moment. Let's continue with the climate policy dilemma.
Okay, I'm sorry for opening it late, Mr. Joshua. I am a parent student, a teacher of mathematics, physics in Rakai district. I'm just developing a feeling that at some point policy sounds like a rule that is at some points stands against implementation of some of the climate actions. I'm just feeling that why is it that the policy is sounding so sounding like a rule? Yeah, basically a rule. Why is it sounding like a rule?
All right, thank you very much. So a policy could sound like a rule, but the policy mainly is to give direction. The biggest part of a policy is to give direction. Then a small part is to penalize those who fail to follow the direction. In the next slide, we shall see how this whole policy is simplified to a local level. But still, I'll use an example of a school. If a school has particular policies, the policies are basically to help the students achieve their main purpose of coming at school. Each side of punishing students, it's only to those few who are trying to go against the policy. But most times the policy is just to help every nation achieve a better state or a better form of the environment. But in the next slides, I think we shall simplify this more to a local level and how we can participate. Mr. Kibiriga, you have a question? Unmute and ask. All right, Faith, you can unmute and ask your question. Faith, you can ask your question. All right, Sembacha, you can ask your question.
Thank you. Mine is not a question, but maybe to respond. Was that Mr. O'Hero Stefan who asked about the policy that he was saying that it looks like it is a command, but to me, I would think that in most cases, policies are set whereby if something which could cause a negative impact on an individual or on the environment. When we come back to our climate policies, you can set up a policy whereby you set up that policy in such a way favoring the environment. For example, if you don't, for example, this recent policy that every Saturday we are going to be cleaning the whole country. It is now a policy, but it is favoring the environment and even the people. If you go against it, that's when actually sometimes even you get a penalty. We saw recently where people were being beaten if you're not participating, blah blah blah. But that is a policy. In most cases, it is done in favor. It has the highest chances of favoring. For example, if they can put up a policy that for you to construct a school, or to have a school, you must have trees in your compound. That is the policy. So it is favoring the environment, the school, and everyone. So if you go against it, you may not be allowed to put up such a school. So that is the policy. That is according to me.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much for your contribution. And I like the way you brought it up more vividly. Yeah, so we are going to continue. Let me share my screen for the next part. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about a climate policy dilemma. I know you're teachers and you know this word. A dilemma could be like a situation which is a bit contradicting, like you wish to do this, but seems like you're missing out on this. So climate policies sometimes bring up a dilemma. And sometimes it appears like a zero-sum game. For instance, the example we used of putting out the fire. If a house is on fire and you put out you extinguish the fire, everyone is happy. However, in climate, when you're achieving a climate goal, there's a risk of some people being affected. For example, if you have a factory in your community, and you've observed that the factory is emitting a lot of carbon, because one of the climate policies is to reduce the number of CO2 emissions. So if you're to stop that factory, the carbon emissions will stop. However, some people will lose their jobs. So in trying to implement this climate policy, sometimes as a nation or a policy maker, you find yourself in a kind of a contradicting situation. In another example, if you're Sembacha, your hand is up, but we shall receive questions in a few minutes. For instance, if you're asked to protect all the forests in your district for the sake of the climate, and you come with the NEMA officers to implement this policy, you may find that there are some people in that community who have been staying in the forest, who have been hunting from that forest, and that forest is their way of life. If you're to implement that policy to the core, it may mean you have to displace some people from the forest, you have to chase them away. So that's what we call a policy dilemma, that you want to implement the policy, but some people will be affected in the implementation of the policy. I'll use an example of a school. If a school sets a rule that whoever has not paid the full tuition, they must be sent home after 2 weeks of starting the term. And when you're implementing the policy as a finance officer in your school, you may find that if you're to ask every student who did not complete their school fees to go home, the school may stay empty or may stay with very few students. And you find yourself in a hard place. Should I implement this policy fully or should I implement it partially? So that's what we call a climate policy dilemma. So now we are going fully to climate policy, the definition. They are the laws, strategies, and decisions government make to reduce climate change and to help communities to adapt. In this definition, let me talk more about the last part of to help communities to adapt. Adaptation means evolving to be alive in the present situation. For example, if in your region, let me say in the western part of the country, in Kasese, there's a tendency of the rivers bursting when the rains are higher. And how can those people adapt? They might find, let us build a bit far from the river, or let us plant trees, big trees on the river banks that can help to break the force of the river. This is just an hypothetical example. And let me say that, for example, in the eastern part of the country, there's a tendency of droughts coming many times in 1 year. So one of the ways that community can adapt is to get drought-resistant crops, to practice water harvesting. But you notice that all these adaptation mechanisms sometimes require funding. So when you go to this definition again, let me hope it will make sense now that climate policy refers to laws, strategies, and decisions governments make to reduce climate change and to help communities adapt. For instance, if the government sets up a policy that whenever there is a climate disaster, we need to support these communities, maybe with seedlings, with water harvesting mechanisms, like they set up things that can help a community resist this climate crisis. Like if there's a drought, they have stronger crops, or if there's a flood, they have places they can go to be safe from the flood. That is a form of adaptation. So adaptation helps you to, the climate change is not going away now, but I need to be alive. So what can the government help me? That's adaptation. And another concept that you'll hear of, it's not in today's discussion, but let me share it. It's mitigation. Mitigation mainly is to reduce carbon emissions, but adaptation is to help people live amidst the climate crisis. Next is climate policy seeks to answer these questions. So in primary, we studied that there's a class, a subject called SST. And in SST, there was the African Union, the United Nations, something like that. So and in second, this like in universities, for some courses, you learn about the Sustainable Development Goals. But also some secondary school subjects also have the sustainable development goals. So among the sustainable development goals, there is sustainable development goal 13, which is for addressing the climate crisis. So when this goal is set by the United Nations under a meeting of all nations who are subscribing to the United Nations, and in the achieving of this goal, we must reduce emissions, we must limit temperature rise, we must protect communities, and we must let those who are responsible be accountable. So all climate policies you're going to encounter with, they knock on these four things: reducing emissions, temperature rise, who is accountable, and protecting communities. So each policy can address one to all of these things. Protecting communities is mostly about the implementation. Like if someone came in, let me give an example of a village, let me use Masaka, and he says he would like to install solar panels in, let me say, a whole sub-county. It's a good project, but sometimes it may affect the people. If the installing of these solar panels comes with displacement of people, it will be a good climate policy, but it will not bring climate justice. It will bring unfairness and injustice. So in the climate policies you're going to be looking at, in your personal practice, will be addressing, reducing emissions, temperature rise, who is responsible, and protecting communities. So why does climate policy matter? So climate policy is very important and it matters so much. I'm going to use this circle of the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goals are all the efforts of the United Nations. Whenever you see UN in your community, UN going when there is war, UN going in many countries, their main aim is to achieve these development goals. There is end poverty, zero hunger, health, education, gender equality, safe water. All these goals are the main aims of the UN. But there's this Sustainable Development Goal 13, which is called climate action. So why is climate action very important? Because whenever there is a climate crisis, every other goal of the UN is affected. So, for example, I'm going to give some example, and I also welcome someone to share an example. If there's a drought in a region, it affects education, because if the parents have not made good harvests, they will not pay school fees on time, or they will not have food for their children, and it will be difficult to send their children to school. Or even when they're able to send, there will be many times of their students defaulting. So the climate action affects the education. We look at the example of health. If there are many floods in an area, the goal of health will not be achieved fully, because whenever there's a flood, the hygiene drops, because all toilets get full, the sewage mixes with the water for drinking, and there's a challenge in health. If anyone who would like to share how climate affects any other sustainable development goal, if you can't see them clearly on the screen, you can check it. You can Google on your phone and see the sustainable development goals. So I'm opening the floor for anyone who would like to share how climate affects any other sustainable development goal. And you can raise up your hand and share. Whose hand is up? So does that mean none of us understood the intersectionality of climate and other SDGs?
Hello.
Thank you.
Yes, Caroline.
Okay, according to me, when you look at those development goals, there is eradication for poverty. You'll find that it will be very hard to eradicate poverty given the occurrences like, say, maybe drought, like in Uganda, our backbone is agriculture. And if drought continues, which is also a form of climate change, you'll find that it will affect most of the Ugandans. And the poverty level will be at a high level. Not again as the Millennium Goals say that eradication of what? Poverty. It will be a little bit hard because of that climate change form.
Yeah, thank you very much for your submission. Any other person would like to share? I can see in the chat.
Yes, Mr. Joshua can also share.
Yes, please share.
Well, I am looking at climate affecting the SDG number 2, that is zero hunger, if I may mention it correctly. If you keenly observe, you realize that the weather pattern is a bit unpredictable. It's a bit changing. The changing rainfall, you can't tell. And also the extreme heat that is a bit rampant is affecting the crop yield. So there is a bit of continuous crop failure, and this is making it very hard for the SDG number 2 being to be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see in the chat, Pedun Brenda said clean water and sanitation is an SDG which may not be reached if there are floods as a result of climate change. Yeah, thank you very much for those submissions. So we have got to see that whenever you see people talking about climate, or you see projects that are pro-climate, it's not that people are just fanatics of climate or they just have passion of climate. They are following the policies the United Nations have set in place. The UN sets these policies, and it's voluntarily for you to choose to participate. Some just follow because they're employed to do that, but people who are doing advocacy, they do it voluntarily. They choose to study about them and see how they can be part of the solution. How does climate affect SDG of quality education? There's a question here. Anyone who can respond to this?
What happened today?
I beg your pardon. All right. So we are going to have Sharon Zawede, your hand is up.
I'm fine with it.
To that question of how climate affects education.
Yeah.
When there are droughts or shortage of water, for example, the students who would have gone to school, they wake up to move long distances looking for water, so they will not go to school. And even when there are floods, the roads become impassable. So it's hard for them to go to school. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we are going to have a moment of some questions, then we have a break. So if you have some questions, you can raise up your hand. Anyone with a question? Steven, you can unmute and ask.
So now that we are seeing that there is a dilemma in the climate policy aspect, at a point when you feel like you're doing something that is favoring climate, that is improving our climate, on the other hand, it is causing another effect to people. Like you gave an example of closing the factory that is increasing the emission. Then on the other hand, people are getting unemployed. Now, where does this put the actions of climate, actions to climate, and also the policy itself? Where is that putting the position of climate action?
Yeah, thank you very much. So that brings in a concept called climate justice, where they say that, let me start with the concept of climate justice, that not all climate action will give climate justice. For instance, if you were to just close a factory at once, mostly they are the poor people who will suffer. Whereas the goals of UN are being met of protecting the environment, now the community is suffering with joblessness. And in that action you've achieved, you've worsened the sustainable goal of ending poverty and zero hunger. You've affected so many. So that's when they choose to come up with a policy which achieves climate justice, not only climate action. Climate justice means that while you're meeting the goals of climate, you're not affecting the people. Remember, one of the policies of climate is protecting communities. So for such cases of a factory, they come up with technology which limits emissions or which filters their emissions. I'll use the example of a car. In the first cars which were common in the world, the way the emissions came from the engine is the way they would be emitted to the environment. But because we couldn't do away with the car, so we had to come up with a technology which reduces these emissions, but also preserving the car. And something called a catalytic converter was invented. This catalytic converter traps a lot of the carbon before it goes out in the atmosphere. So in that case, people won't suffer with lack of transport. However, the CO2 emissions are going to be emitted. Another country could implement using electric vehicles, and that will work for that country. But for a country like Uganda, the concept of electric vehicles may make many other people fail to move. So they have to, we employ more of technologies which reduce the emissions of CO2. Like the URA will tax more or will refuse those cars which are emitting too much fuels. And another example of factories. Factories also the directed to put up technologies which trap carbon trap the dangerous carbon molecules before carbon is emitted. You may wonder how will this work? Let me take you back to this concept of the carrot and the stick. Factories are given both carrot and stick. For example, if companies implement equipment or technologies which trap much of the harmful carbon before it's emitted, they could be given tax subsidies, meaning they are going to pay less taxes. Also, they're also given rights to participate in the carbon markets, meaning the more they implement some of that technology, the less taxes they are being charged and the more money they can receive. Then those who deliberately refuse to manage their emissions before they're emitted, they are given penalties by NEMA. So in that way, we are implementing a carbon policy which won't affect the people, but it's putting the burden on mostly the investor. In this policy of carbon of who is responsible. This policy, let's continue on who is responsible, because someone who went to get a job in a factory, he's not the one who built the factory. So implementing a policy which affects him directly will not give climate justice. But putting a burden on the factory to put technology which reduces the detrimental effect of their emission. So you're putting the responsibility back on the investor themselves. So I hope that made sense to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joshua, because my worry was implementing a policy that contradicts the achievement of the SDG. Basically, I was looking at the zero poverty, zero hunger. So you brought it very well. And I was looking at it as maybe just removing the factories and you're leaving people in a dilemma where they don't have to. But I've got it very well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me see. Is there any other question? All right, let me see. So if there's no any other question, we are going to have a recess of 7 minutes, a break of 7 minutes from, so at 10 minutes past 7, we shall resume our second session. So in this break, you can walk around, but don't leave the meeting. Thank you. Welcome back from the break. How has the session so far? You can share your feedback in the chat, or you can use an emoji. Oh, thank you. All right, we are going to start our second session. This second session is going to give an opportunity to also do something practically. I'll be sharing about advocacy and policy, and at some point we shall have a breakout rooms where you will be able to do something practically. And in your breakout room, you'll select someone to present what you've discussed together. Zoom will automatically put you in a breakout room. When you're there, you'll use 5 minutes basically to discuss all these things and make a presentation. While you're doing your work, don't limit your thinking like you're in an exam. You feel free to use Google, feel free to use ChatGPT, as long as you can deliver on the assignment on time. Yeah. All right. So are you all able to see my screen, which I've shared? We are going to talk about climate policy and advocacy. It's going to be a continuation of what we had discussed earlier. Policy will be just a continuation of the background we have had in advocacy. It's like speaking up, but it's not limited to speaking up. So will a white person tell your story? This is a question that we always ask people who would like to do advocacy, who did not know advocacy existed. I'll share something about the first time I got to, the first year I got to learn about, I knew climate change, I knew there was drought, I knew animals were dying because the fields have dried up, but I couldn't tell exactly that this is something which is global. I thought it maybe where I come from is unfortunate, or maybe something went wrong. But when I got to learn about climate change, then I could join the dots why there's a pattern of droughts in a region where I come from. And I got to learn that it's not only limited to the eastern part of the country, but also in Ethiopia, in Kenya. So in the more time I spent in this advocacy work, I got to learn that climate advocacy has been there even before, longer than many of us have lived. Something called the Paris Agreement was put in place when none of us was alive. And ever since it was put in place, countries, like every country has to have delegates to participate in this process, and all non-government organizations, everyone must participate in this process. But you would find that many African countries, citizens are left out. We always believe that as long as the MP has traveled there, as long as the president has traveled there, all of us are represented. But that's a lie. The representation in the UN covers everyone. That's why I would say they would want women to be included, men to be included, academia to be included, where the teachers, you're mostly falling in the academia, but you also women. Was someone asking a question? Okay, let me continue. So when I say, will a white person tell your story? One of the events I traveled to, I found young white children discussing the effects of climate change in Uganda. how Ugandans are being affected by climate change, how women are moving long distances to collect water. And I asked myself, why aren't the Ugandans themselves speaking for their own country? And the response I got is, sometimes we look for Ugandans to come and speak in these spaces, and there is no Ugandan who stands up to speak, or there is no Ugandan who even knows that this event is open to anyone who can join it. So that's one of the things which inspired me to study more about this topic, that let not a white person tell my story, because it's me who understands how climate affects my community. So one of the advantages of you learning advocacy is you'll tell your own story, and no one will take your opportunity just because you can't speak up for your story. So we're going to look at the policy flow. A policy flow comes from the global, national to local, and vice versa, from local, national to global. For instance, in the previous class, we looked at the Sustainable Development Goals. They cover the global vision. And then as a country, we also have to implement them. Let me look at one of ending poverty, of zero hunger. It has been said in the whole world that we have to fight hunger in every part of the country. And different nations offer some money to address this issue of hunger. And when that money is set aside, how does Uganda participate? Uganda may not offer that money, but Uganda can apply to access that money to fight hunger. And when Uganda receives that money, it sets up policies which are going to help the country to fight hunger. And some of those policies are implemented through things like NADs, through different programs which are around food, and back to the local level. And then how can it flow back from the local to the top? In implementing in the local level, you might find that the seedlings you brought are not endemic to that community. And feedback is taken back that for this kind of community, we need drought-resistant seedlings. And it goes back until it goes back to the global level. So it's both top to bottom and bottom to top. For any policy which is going to be implemented, we follow this kind of flow. So we're going to talk about we're going to look at global meetings or global agreements. For global agreements in line with climate, there is the Paris Agreement. And this Paris Agreement helps us to meet the Sustainable Development Goal 13. So the Paris Agreement is a legally binding agreement under the UNFCCC. It's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was adopted by 195 countries. Adopting means all these countries came together and agreed that we are going to work on this policy to fight climate change. And among these 195 countries, Uganda is inclusive. And because this was adopted by Uganda, even you are included in it because you're Ugandan. And its main goal is to reduce temperatures, to reduce emissions, that is mitigation, and to provide adaptation finance, like how do we get money to help people who have been affected by climate change. So because Uganda is one of the countries which subscribes to these global laws, you as a Ugandan citizen, it is your right to participate in these policies. So back to the previous slide of Sustainable Development Goal 13 and global events. Many events are set up globally to help in addressing of the Sustainable Development Goal. Let me use an example of a community. If in a community they have a problem of thieves, and many thieves are disturbing the community, they can come up with a meeting, annual meetings, on how to address this problem of thieves. And because you're a community member, it's your right to go in that meeting. But if you refuse to go, no one will force you. And if in that meeting money is being shared, no one will bring it to you. So the same way UN sets up annual meetings to help in achieving the SDG 13. You forgive me, I wrote SDG 3, but I was meaning SDG 13. And all of us, it's our right to participate in these meetings. But because we don't know that these meetings are there, We don't know that even children have an avenue to participate in these meetings. Teachers have an avenue. So we find ourselves not being part of the discussion. So this is also something else I want you to know. Then SB meetings, these are meetings of subsidiary bodies. We won't go in depth of that, but I just want you to know that they are global meetings in fulfilling any global policy. And there are also national meetings, there are also regional meetings, there are district meetings, still in addressing this policy. So in this part of global events, the examples I gave, there are COPs, there are subsidiary meetings with the subsidiary bodies, there are youth conferences. I'll give an example for you. Recently, there was a local conference of youth addressing climate change, which was held here in Kampala. And I've seen many teachers who are in the call are still in the bracket of youth that are below 35 years. This is a meeting where you're eligible to attend and learn about climate. But if you don't know about it, you'll never participate in it. So one of the first steps of advocacy is seeking knowledge in a particular topic you want to talk about. Sometimes you'll be watching on TV and there's someone really speaking, or an MP really speaking uninformed things, and as a teacher you feel like something that's spoken is a bit missing. But just because they've spoken up, their opinion is taken, and you who knew the right thing but didn't speak up, your opinion will not be taken. So that's the importance of advocacy. It helps you to speak up for a particular topic or a particular issue, and it gives you a door for you to participate. So can we participate in these events? Yes, we can participate in these events, in fulfilling these policies. One of the ways to participate is as a party delegate, as a constituency delegate, as an NGO observer. Yeah, so this is in advocacy. It's important for you to participate in events relating to a topic you've chosen to do advocacy on. For our lesson today, we are mostly focusing on a climate discourse, meaning you're obliged to know which kind of climate events are there internationally, which ones are there nationally, which ones are there locally, and how can I attend in these events? How can I be part of these events? And when you go in these events, you'll find that actually you know more about climate than the people speaking. And then next thing you ask, how can I speak? Or you might find that one of my children is very good at this topic. Or if I teach one of my children these things, they can communicate better than the person who is communicating. And you let children participate in these things. So when we spoke about the policies, we mostly spoke about the United Nations policies. So in that SDG 13, in fighting climate change, locally in the nation, there is a policy called the National Climate Change Act. And this act is basically to put it in law that fighting climate change is a main goal of Uganda, and it highlights ways Uganda will fight this climate change through that Climate Change Act, because without the act, you can't implement anything. Sometimes it will be illegal, or sometimes it will be like uncaptured. Then there are the nationally determined contributions, NDCs. This is a policy our country is following right now. How does this NDC work? Globally, we have to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions because every country is emitting carbon dioxide. So every country is given a goal of at least reduce your emissions to this level. And in Uganda, our quota, they gave us our quota. And to implement our quota, we must use nationally determined contributions, meaning Uganda is contributing this amount of reduction. And how does it come down to you? If they say, I'm going to use numbers which are hypothetical. For instance, if they say Uganda has to reduce their carbon dioxide by 100 kilograms. In Uganda has so many ministries. There's a Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Water, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Finance. So every ministry is going to contribute in achieving this goal. Ministry of Energy will choose to support energy projects which are environmentally friendly. For example, it will choose to use more hydropower projects, more as compared to thermal power projects. But thermal power is where they use fuel to run a turbine and make electricity like a generator. So the Ministry of Energy can choose to put more of its activities in those projects which are environmentally friendly. And by doing that, it's reducing the CO2 emissions. So it may contribute maybe at 20. Then you come to the Ministry of Works and Transport. The Ministry of Works may say, for every road we are building, we are going to put many trees besides that road. And that will be our contribution to reducing these emissions. And let me say, the Ministry of Works also contributes at 20. Then Ministry of Education will say, for us, we are going to contribute by educating students about climate, about the wise things they can do to be environmentally friendly, so that since they're the leaders of tomorrow, they'll be able to make these kinds of changes. And you'll say our contribution, we can quantify it to maybe a 10 or a 15. Then you go to the Ministry of Ministry of NEMA about the environment. You'll say we are going to work towards restoring all destroyed environment. So you find that every ministry is contributing in achieving the goal of the country of reducing CO2 emission. That's why it's called the nationally determined contributions, because every ministry will contribute to meet the goal of that country, and every country will contribute to meet the goal of the entire world. So that, in a nutshell, that's what they mean by NDC, nationally determined contributions. Then Ministry of Finance, how it can participate in fighting this climate change. It could say, as a Ministry of Finance, through our fiscal policy, we are going to tax very highly those cars which are contributing too much carbon, meaning in a period of 5 years, no cars which are emitting a lot of carbon will be imported in this country, and through our ministry, we shall reduce the CO2 emissions of Uganda, let me say, by 40. And you find by every ministry supplying, contributing, the goal to reduce the carbon emissions of Uganda is being met. Another one can be through another policy that is done in Uganda is the National Adaptation Plan. But before I start the National Adaptation Plan, let me open up for some questions. If there's a question or someone needs to any edification in any place, you can raise up your hand. Oh, that means they've been together. So let me continue. The next policy that Uganda we are actively participating in is the National Adaptation Plan. The National Adaptation Plan, adaptation means it helps for us to adapt in the present of the climate crisis. As a nation, it will set a goal that as our nation, we have to every ministry must participate in the adaptation of the country. Meaning, if there is a flood in an area, for example, if there is a flood in your district, do you think how are different ministries affected? When there is a flood in your district, education is affected, and that is under Ministry of Education. A road is destroyed, that is under Ministry of Works and Transport. Power lines could collapse, that is under Ministry of Energy. Local government works welfare, that's under Ministry of Local Government. So you find that every ministry is being affected by a climate crisis, meaning every ministry has a role to play in the adaptation plan of a country. So if we want our country to adapt to climate change, meaning whereas there's climate change, whenever there's a climate disaster, let our nation not be made incapacitated because of a climate crisis. Meaning Ministry of Works can decide to build bigger drainage systems, to build well-planned roads that can help to direct water away from the flood-prone areas. Then Ministry of Energy can come up with alternative sources of energy in areas which are prone to be affected by climate disaster. For example, in the east where they have too much sunshine, the ministry can decide to put up more solar harvesting plants which can harvest solar power and supply to people. So in a nutshell, every ministry can apply an adaptation plan of a nation. And how can your school participate? The school is the main place where many things are born. In school is where we learn about the drought-resistant crops. In school is where we learn about fighting pests, and is where we learn about most things. But learning climate helps you to know how everything you're learning in school can feed into the national adaptation policy. Now, as teachers, when you're more equipped about adaptation, meaning you can teach students about these policies, how they can adapt, how they can help their communities be resistant to floods, be resistant to drought. And that's a way school basically can participate, and also in educating the students themselves. Local events, I spoke about the local conference of youth, which is LCOI, and community events. So before you go to climate policy advocacy, is there any question? I'm going to elaborate in any place. Or any, give some reactions. I would like to know if you're all there. It's like I'm talking on a radio station where I can't see my audience. Oh, thank you for that feedback. All right, let's continue. So most times when you hear the word an advocate, by default you think about a lawyer, because there are the many people we know as advocates. But advocacy means standing up for a particular issue. Why are lawyers called advocates? Because they stand up for the law, they teach the law, they talk about the law, they work towards implementing the law. So they are advocates of the law. So you yourself, you can be an advocate, but for climate, or as a teacher, you can be an advocate for academia. So advocacy simply means to speak out or to stand behind a particular issue. You can be an advocate for women's rights. You can be an advocate for it. So when you hear advocacy, don't limit advocacy to lawyers. And why is advocacy important? Whenever there's advocacy helps influence decisions. When you speak up about something, it can help a solution to be made in time. For example, if students are having a problem in their dormitory and no one speaks about that problem, a solution will not come, because there's no way the administration will learn about this problem. In the same way, that's how advocacy works. When you speak about something, you're creating indirectly avenues for a solution to come. You're raising awareness that there's an issue here which needs urgent action. Teachers as advocates. Teachers can be advocates in many ways, but one of the foundations of you being an advocate is it should match with your persona. Because some people are really good they love writing. So they can speak about this issue, but they can have more results when they choose to be writers about this issue. And when they are writing about climate, they can even easily see students who love writing, and they guide them to write about climate disasters in their areas, how they can participate in this climate solution. So that's why it's good for it to later to match to your personality. Me, I began mostly as a climate advocacy, to speak up about climate, to write about it. But later I found myself more skewed towards capacity building and training. So mostly in my climate advocacy, I'm more focusing on capacity building and training, because that mostly matches with me. So it's also, a teacher can inform themselves about national and local issues about that topic that she's on to be an advocate for. In our case, it's climate. You equip yourself with national knowledge, local knowledge, and global knowledge. When I say this, you may think of a whole syllabus, but it's not a whole syllabus. You just begin with the SDG 13. You put in your phone, what is SDG 13? It's about 2 paragraphs and you learn about it. This is SDG 13. So you've got to know that globally, this is the direction we are taking to fight climate. Then the next thing, you go locally. How is it addressed in Uganda? And things will come up. So seeking knowledge about a particular topic does not mean you're going to start a 3-year course about it. No. It means you're intentionally allocating a small amount of your time daily to educate yourself about that particular topic. Why is it important? In a short time, you'll stand out from the rest of your peers. Because this topic of climate or most global issues that you saw on the SDG goals, they are not taught so much in school, and yet that's the direction of the entire world. Meaning, that's kind of, I would say, how money moves. Money is moving in to achieve all those SDG goals. So you might find yourself that you learning about a particular SDG and being good at it can set you apart from your peers. Another way teachers can advocate is when you learn about those different local, national, and international events about that topic, you attend those events and you network. So here I'm going to use an example of the SDG 13, one of a practical way to do it. Study about it. Next thing, write about it. Then find events about that SDG. Practically, you can organize local events or local actions about that SDG. These are kind of like only 4 steps, but they could take at some time. For instance, in the study of that SDG, you could take maybe a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks studying about it intricately. And writing about it, it just matches with you. If you're a good writer, you can do it faster. But if you're a slower writer, you can just write for your own notes or something. Then finding events about this SDG. It helps you pull you out of the bubble you've been in. Because as a teacher, you have your circle of teachers and circle of people who are supporting you in your path of teaching. But if you attend events about that SDG you've chosen, it pulls you out of your usual circle that you're in. You actually see that actually someone can make a living out of just talking about this thing. And you'll be shocked that whatever they're saying, you have more knowledge about it. You've been trained to speak about it, but you didn't know that there's an avenue for this. So that's the purpose of finding the different events about that particular SDG. Then organize local events, because after some time, you will not like to only be someone who speaks about a problem, but you would like to be part of the solution. Where you find yourself maybe organizing a workshop in your class, organizing a small presentation in your school, organizing many things like in your school. So this is just giving like a map or a background, but it's not limited to this. Are we together to this point? Let me get some feedback. Oh, thank you very much. So now, yeah. We are going to go into breakout rooms. There will be 4 breakout rooms. And in these breakout rooms, you're going to study SDG 13, which is about climate, and present 2 sentences about it, like to tell us what it is, and choose 2 policies in that SDG, and talk about them globally, nationally, and locally. Then share with us the events about that SDG. So this is the assignment that you're going to be having in your breakout rooms. In your breakout room, you're going to choose who will present, and it will be 5 minutes. So enjoy this session. So let me stop sharing my screen and I put you in breakout rooms. Thank you. Mm. Emmanuel, have you joined the breakout room? Rogers, Joseph, Jovan, join your breakout rooms. Omonyono also join your breakout rooms.
Network yange.
Welcome back from the breakout rooms. So the assignment was, you're going to just keep it as brief as possible. You're going to present 2 sentences about the SDG 13, 2 policies, and in the global perspective, national perspective, and local perspectives. Then share some events about that SDG 13, local, continental, and international. So which breakout room will go first? You can raise up your hand if your breakout room is ready. Any room that's ready? Brenda, you can unmute and share and tell us the breakout room you're representing.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm here representing Group 2. When you look at the SDG 13, which majorly focuses on climate action, this SDG aims at taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts, and it mainly promotes mitigation, adaptation, and then also climate education. So the policies that we came up with in our group for SDG 13, one was a global policy, which is a Paris Agreement of 2015, which is an international climate agreement, which seeks to strengthen global action to limit global temperatures and also increase or help countries adapt to climate impacts. Then the other one is the national policy, which is the Uganda National Climate Change Policy of 2015 still. This policy provides a framework for addressing climate change through adaptation, mitigation, and then climate governance and also awareness. So we looked at the events that are related to this SDG 13. We have for local, that is local national Uganda. The event here is basically Uganda climate change policy and implementation activities. So that is the event under that. And then when we look at the importance of it, they're saying that Uganda has continued to strengthen climate governance, including implementation of Climate Change Act and development of climate adaptation plans. The Ministry of Water and Environment is also inclusive on this. Then under continental, which is Africa, we looked at Africa Climate Summit, Nairobi, Kenya of 2023. And this one, most African leaders and stakeholders discussed green growth, climate, and then also finance and Africa's response to climate change. And then we looked at international, which is COP30, which took place, I think, last year in Brazil. Yeah, last year in Brazil. Here, countries met under the UN climate process to advance international climate action, including adaptation, climate finance, and implementation of the Paris Agreement. That is what we discussed with our members in Group 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next group, you can raise up your hand. Joseph, you can.
Can I say something?
Joseph, did you join? Joseph, did you join a breakout group? I didn't see you join.
Mr. Joshua.
Yes, please.
This is Julius Nwamanya, representing Group 3.
Okay, please share.
Okay. So in our group, we looked at SDG 13 as climate action, and the aim is to take urgent action, combat climate change and its impacts. And its role is also to encourage countries and the communities to reduce greenhouse emissions, and it is also to protect climate. It is also promote climate education and awareness. Then the question number 2, two policies about to SDG 13. We looked at Paris Agreement, and we said that it is a global climate treaty that was adopted in 2015 with the main aim to limit global warming. Then we also have national climate change policy. We also looked at that is the national at the national level, and its role is to provide a framework for addressing climate change through adaptation and mitigation. Then we also looked at the district climate change action plan, where every district has its own action mitigation and adaptation plans that it has to implement. Then on question number, the last question, there we looked at the examples of local events. We have World Environmental Day, which is celebrated on every 5th June. Then there is also Little Hands Go Green, where young children organize and plant trees. Then on continental level, we have the African Climate Summit, which was first held in Nairobi in 2003. Then on global level, we have UN Climate Change Conferences. These ones are the coming one. The last one was held in Brazil, and the coming one, I'm not so sure where it is going to be held. And we also have what we call Teachers COP. It is from the Office of the Climate Change, and the coming one will be in Turkey. That's what we had for Group 3. I beg to submit, Mr. Joshua.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. The next group. Stephen, you can unmute and share.
Well, thank you, Mr. Joshua. This is from Group 1. We also discussed something about the assignment and two different statement or different sentence about SDG 13. We looked at this as some and SDG 13 focusing on taking urgent steps to reduce greenhouse gas emission and also building resilience to climate disasters. Then when it came to the different policies, globally we looked at the UNFCCC, that is the United Nations a framework convention on climate change, and this is where also the Paris Agreement was also adopted. And at national level, we looked at the Uganda's climate change. That was the act that was set in 2021. The legally requires climate considerations involving development plan and setting up the climate change departments. And then At the local level, we looked at the Wakiso district climate change policy and so on. So question number 3, we had different events. Some of them have been mentioned, like the World Environmental Day, that's the June 5th, that is the global campaign that's done every year. Maybe at local level, we looked at the Kampala City Clean Up and recycling campaigns that aimed at reducing wastes and also emissions. Then the last question, is there any limit? We agreed that there is no limit in the SDG because it encourages as many actions, as many policies, as many events as possible at global level, national level, and local level. So there is no limit. Thank you, Mr. Joshua.
Welcome. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. And the last group is group 4. Anyone from group 4? All right.
Good evening, members.
Yeah, good evening.
Oh, I was part of group 4. We waited for all members to get in before we started, so we started a bit late. Though on the first question, the 2 statements that we wrote about SDG 13, one of the members wrote in climate action calls on countries to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And he also said it focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening communities' ability to adapt to climate-related hazards. Then when we went on the policies, we were still discussing the first one when we got out of the breakout rooms, which was at the national level. And it is a National Climate Act 2021, which provides Uganda with work climate change response, including adaptation, financing, monitoring, and mitigation. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, all teams, for your participation. Now, I think my time is up, but allow me go through the few things I prepared and summarize. Now, from your presentation, I think no group came across the Kyoto Protocol. It's also one of the policies which countries move on, which is the basis for what many countries are putting in place. I think you can Google it later when you're doing your own study. And when you're looking, when we're looking at the events, you see these events don't have an age limit. They don't have that they are made for only these kinds of people. Everyone is welcome in the event. Whereas negotiators play the most pivotal role, but even observers are invited. Many other people are invited. Then someone talked about the event called the Youth Go Green, which brings together many young children to plant trees and stuff. But when you are presenting, I also would like you to know that you can set up events in your school. You can bring together students, maybe to have a day every term to be a climate day. And for whatever subject you're teaching, it can be, this climate day can empower them in that subject. For example, if you're teaching a literature teacher and you teach poetry, you teach drama, you teach public speaking, when students, you give them assignment to study about this topic and they present about it, they act about it, it can also make their learning more fun. They're learning things which help, which are global, but it also helping them build their personal skills. If you're a science teacher or a chemistry teacher, there are many chemistry components in climate, like the process of the greenhouse gas emission, the types of gases which are emitted in the atmosphere. You can create participatory things which students can participate in. Why are these things important? Is that they open up the mind of a child to a global perspective. That the child is not limited only to the school things. Most times when we're in school, we're a bit not sure of what they're teaching me, how will it help me in my life? And these are some of the things which can give a child an opportunity of engaging with things which are actually happening in the world. And I would like to tell you that in the space of climate advocacy, there are very many opportunities which are open for everyone. When you're doing your local advocacy, you're having events with students, you're organizing a school project, you're organizing a school action, a school campaign. Someone could write about it. You can even invite the media to write about it. It's also part of your advocacy, and it increases your publicity. Through that, you can find yourself attending many international events just by doing your local advocacy. It may seem so far-fetched, but it actually works. You have an opportunity where you've met with the organization which is providing this training. Once you're starting an advocacy in your school, they can carry you through that process to lift your advocacy from a local level to an international level. Some schools have social media platforms. You can organize those local activities and they are shared in the social media platform of that school. It increases your horizons. Let me check back on my slides. So some of the strengths that a teacher has as an advocate. The voice of a teacher carries a lot of weight. Because if it's a teacher communicating, naturally we are wired to listen to teachers, to listen to doctors, to listen to political leaders. Naturally, it has been embedded in us to listen to such people who have authority in society. Also, as a teacher, you can easily build synergies with climate organizations and they support you through this local advocacy. Because we won't exhaust the whole forms of advocacy, but at least with what you've learned, it can plant a seed in you organizing local advocacy in your school with your students. So we are going to go through stakeholder mapping a bit fast. If you've made up your mind to do advocacy on climate change, meaning you have to look at who are your stakeholders. Stakeholders are everyone affected by a particular issue that you're working on. In this case, climate change. If we have seen there is a global policy, to a national policy, to a local policy, maybe to a district policy. So if you want to work on climate change, you must know this is the policy we're working together. So who are our stakeholders? The local people are stakeholders, students are stakeholders, farmers are stakeholders, the government people are stakeholders, NGOs are stakeholders. Then advocacy planning. Advocacy planning, let's go to the next slide that will help us to cover many at a time. Let me use an example of you're building a school. When you decide to build a school in a particular place, there are collaborators and there are resistors. On the side of collaborators are people who are supporting you in that goal. The collaborators can be passive or active. Then resistors are the people who are resisting you in that goal. They can be active resistors or passive resistors. If you want to put up a school, you must know who are my collaborators. The Ministry of Education is one of your collaborators. Other schools in that area that love you are one of your collaborators. Then resistors. Some schools that hate you may be some of your resistors. So in advocacy, there's something we call a theory of change. You must work towards converting all your collaborators from being passive collaborators to being active collaborators. Meaning if you've just set up your school, you know Ministry of Education is your collaborator, but it might be passive. One of the ways of transforming it into being an active collaborator on your side. You try to adhere to all the guidelines it has set up, participate in the events the ministry has set up, so that your school gets to be known by them, and they become active collaborators towards your school. Then resistors. Some resistors can be turned into collaborators, but some cannot be turned. So it helps you to know that which ones can I engage in and which ones will I not engage in. In the same way, when you're planning to do advocacy as a school or as a teacher, you must know who are our collaborators. Some collaborators you could find could be all organizations which are pro-climate or pro-environment. Those are collaborators. So you must find in those organizations which ones are active, which ones are passive. For example, this organization that is offering this course for you is an active collaborator. When you're organizing something, you can let them that you're organizing this and this. Please guide us on how we can do it. Those are your collaborators. So you must have all the list of collaborators on your side and let them know on what you're doing. They can help you to quicken your advocacy journey. So it's not so slow, because there is no need to reinvent that when some people have already gone ahead of you. Resistors in this climate advocacy. Some people absolutely doubt that there is no climate change. They feel like climate change is just a form of drama or someone else's propaganda. So you must know which are my resistors, so that you don't waste time in trying to sell to them that idea, trying to invite them to an event, because they may just cause challenges for you in this advocacy journey. Stakeholder mapping, I think we had looked at it, trying to know who are your collaborators, who are your resistors, who of them have influence, and who have the information you need, and who needs the information. And it's when you identify your allies and resistors. They're the same as collaborators. If you are fighting climate change in your community, who are your allies and who are your resistors? We won't do this practically because of time. But in your advocacy, you'll need to know the problem you're addressing. In our case, it's climate change. Find evidence of the climate change. For instance, if you find evidence that in your community there have been floods, there has been droughts, that's the evidence you've built up. So if you choose to be someone who speaks about it, you speak about that. If you're a writer, you write about it. If you're going to do a local event or a student campaign, it's around that problem that you've found. Then the next thing, you can organize actions and do follow-ups. So some ideas for students' participation: there are climate experiments, local climate mapping, climate writing, climate awareness posters, and some students who are allowed to participate on social media through their school, they can do something on social media. I think I've come to the end of the presentation today. I'm really grateful for the class that I've been given today. Apologies for going 12 minutes beyond your time. And thank you so much for listening to me. Lillian, I pass it back to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Mnok, for sharing your web of knowledge. I am sure the participants are really charged up to be active climate advocates. So as you can see, the reactions are coming in. Thank you. More love for Mr. Omnok. We can keep reacting. Let's keep reacting. Can we have a volunteer to also give a word of thanks to Mr. Omnok for his expertise and his ability to share his web of knowledge? Any volunteer?
Can I go?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. And we are very appreciative for sharing the knowledge you've given us today, for your time and everything you've shared with us. The session has really helped us to understand climate policies and advocacy better, and how we can
use advocacy to create positive changes in our schools and community. We promise to put what we have learned in this session into actions, share the knowledge with others, and also use our voices to advocate for meaningful climate actions. Thank you very much, sir, once again, and we are very grateful for the session.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra, for sharing your word of appreciation. I can also see in the chat we have Mr. Pius, who is saying, thank you, Mr. Munuk, for the educative presentation. Ms. Brenda is also saying it was an amazing presentation. Is there anyone else who would also want to air out their vote of thanks? Yes, I can see Mr. Joseph reacting. Any other speaker for gender balance? Because at the end of the day, we want justice. So can we have a gentleman also share his word of appreciation? Okay, thank you, Ms. Brenda. Thank you to Yanai Haki Africa for hosting too. Thank you so much for that feedback. Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Joshua. Okay, I know our time is fast spent and I would want to close in prayer. Mr. Mnok, we appreciate so much for sharing that much that you know about policy and making it easy for us to complete in person. Sorry. I believe the participants are...
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe the participants are encouraged, and I like the feedback from Mr. Joshua Chibilige. He has said that it's an encouragement and the awakening that advocacy is not limited to law only. So participants, in our chats, I will also put a feedback form for us to give Mr. Omnuk more feedback on his presentation. And maybe later on in the future, he will also come back and continually share his knowledge with us. Okay, I can also see feedback coming in from Mr. Peter. He's saying, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And he's also saying, thank you, Madam Lillian. We really appreciate. I have learned a lot in advocacy. Thank you so much. Let us continue the conversation on our social platforms, on media, and feel free to also tag me whenever you have some posts that you are talking about in relation to climate. Just like Mr. Mnok has told us, talk about it, write about it. That is the first way to advocate for climate, and in this case, for climate justice. Okay, I would want a volunteer to close us in prayer. Maybe I could randomly scroll. Mr. Semakula, we can't leave the session without hearing your voice. We humbly request that you close us in prayer.
Okay, let's humble ourselves for a word of prayer. Dear God Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this group. I thank you for this team. And I thank you for the gift of life and for the knowledge and wisdom that you've given us and our facilitators today. I thank you that we've learned more on how to protect the environment you gave us, on how to be good stewards through advocacy, through climate protection. Thank you, Father. We pray that all that we learn, King of Kings, we are able to apply. We also thank you for the platform given to us by Yanai. We thank you for Lillian. We thank you for all our coordinators in this team, Lord Father. May you continue pushing them, Father, to learn more as they sharpen us more. Thank you for General Mercies for those that are traveling. and for good health for those that are fighting for their lives. Pray all this in your name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Semakula, for that powerful prayer. Amen and amen. See you next time. We appreciate your patience. Thank you. I'll also send the feedback form in our main group so that Mr. Mnok, by end of tomorrow, he is able to have feedback from you. Have a great night and see you next week.